There's a version of Disneyland that most of us grew up with. It's a place built on magic, imagination, story, and for us, that's always been the foundation.
But what if that's not actually the foundation? What if the real engine of Disneyland is automation? Not metaphorically, structurally. Today, we're talking about factories, block systems, assembly lines, animatronics, and why the most influential theme park ever built might actually be one of the most sophisticated machines of the 20th century. When we first started the show, I never imagined we'd be getting as deep into Imagineering with this topic.
Me neither, and that's exactly why we wanted to get into it. Today, we are joined by Roland Betancourt, author of Disneyland and the Rise of Automation, which releases on April 28th. This book just doesn't look at Disneyland historically, it reframes it. It argues that Disneyland isn't just theme storytelling, it's an industrial automation disguised as fantasy. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, Roland, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the center of your argument here. You are suggesting that Disneyland isn't just inspired by factories, it actually operates like one. So when did that really click for you? When did this shift from being an interesting comparison to being the organizing logic of the park happen for you?
Yeah, so a little bit of a background story. I am a medieval art historian,
Oh, wow.
and I teach at UC Irvine, so I thought, oh, I'm 20 minutes away. I'll spend time in the park and find something to write about that connects my interest. I'm a Floridian, born and raised, so Disney's always been in the blood. Um, and so when I was thinking about what I was going to write on, I thought it would be something medieval and theming, and I'm an art historian, I'm a medievalist. Those are the
Sure.
obvious options. And the more time I spend in the park, the more seduced I was by the fact that a lot of what has always hooked me to the park is, the slight jerks and movements of rides as they leave the station, all the that's sort of those unseen hands of technology. And so I began diving into it. And I think that question of yours of when it really clicked was when I realized that literally the term automation was coined in 1952 and was the biggest hot button issue by the time the park was opening its doors. And so that's really when this sort of inkling became really historically grounded and began to open up doors and how I was looking and thinking about the park, not only in its creation and design, but also in the decades that follow and how automation technologies are really adopted as sort of creative experiences for theme parks.
Well, I really relate to that because I feel like I'm one of those people that when I'm on an attraction, what I try to do is look the other way to see where do they not want me to see. So I really feel you on that.
Yeah, it's actually really bad these days. I'll go on a ride, especially things like Peter Pan, and I have no idea what's actually going on. Like there could be no sets. I have not looked.
Right.
I'm only looking at the track. I'm looking at all the random places. Which is, I don't know, it's sort of opened up a whole new Disneyland and Disney World to me.
Yeah.
I feel like that's so interesting. When we were talking before this, I was like, it's makes so much sense, everything that you're saying, but I've never looked at it that perspective, that it's like that detailed and that structured and everything. So it's very interesting to hear that side.
Yeah, someone recently told me that after reading my book, they were like, I never thought about this before, but now I remember everything. Like the
Yes.
Yeah.
memories of
Yes.
sounds and experiences just were there. Were completely untapped. And I really love that. I think that's also somehow how I approached the project. It was like it's like that metadata was always there in your brain with all the memories. Yeah.
Right. I'm the opposite of Steven, so I am very oblivious to all of it, but now I can't wait to go back into the park on my next one and be like, all right, let me take notes and see where all this goes.
I'm glad that's sort of the point. It's like sort of unveiling a whole nother layer of experience and storytelling that's happening.
Yeah, for sure. And most Disney history focuses on Walt being inspired by the Greenfield Village, but you focus on the Ford River Rouge plant. Rouge, sorry.
Yeah.
Why does that matter so much, that detail?
Yeah, I began there because exactly that. I feel like Greenfield Village, the Chicago Railroad Fair, they're such iconic sort of sites of inspiration for Walt that I really wanted to I was trying to get a story that would capture this moment. And I was like, oh, they also went to the River Rouge factory at a really auspicious moment in this history when Ford was also they had just coined the term internally of automation, were using it, and they were really rehabbing the entire factory, and so it was a really sort of momentous moment to think about. Walt always had an interest in technology, so something that really sort of s struck him and, like, stuck with him in the years that sort of I think for me, it's sort of like a horizon expansion of, like, we know what the theming what's possible and what we like to do in these theme places, but I think that really opened up a whole world of opportunities of what he could do with the technology. I think that's really exciting. It's accessible because, like, the story, so let's just flip the coin, which I really sort of enjoyed diving into that story.
Yeah, and I think kind of piggybacking on that, do you think Walt saw this factory as something to humanize, or do you think he saw it as something that he could perfect and kind of take in his own direction?
That's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both. One of my favorite stories that comes up later in the book is when they're doing the Ford Magic Skyway, and they're sort of doing sort of recon trips to Ford factories. And as sort of the story is recounted, is that Walt saw something at the factory, an ingot conveyor to like convey like giant molten pieces of metal. And he was like, "Do you think we could turn this into an attraction?" And they're like, "Sure, someone could figure this out at the studio." And I sort of love that story because there's something casual there of like, this seems interesting. Can we make that work? Um, and I think that's sort of like at the heart of this sort of desire to it goes down to like that deep fascination we have with technology and that sort of enchantment that technology does. And so I think in some ways what Walt was doing in a very smart way was that like he recognized that certain technologies like inspired a certain excitement or fascination. And he's like, okay, let's grab that and then fuse it with our sort of creative IPs or whatever you want to call them to then sort of like heighten that sort of enchantment that was possible. So I think there was that level of like perfection and humanizing at the same time. In some ways, like the long history of Disney really does perfect a lot of these technologies because for the first time, you're having to be hyper concerned about guests and how they're behaving and all the things they can do incorrectly and how to prevent that. And so there's a sort of hyper layer of like, let's make this as safe as possible because you're not dealing with like a chunk of metal, you're actually dealing with someone who might stand up. So that I think is another aspect that, like, even within the internal automation story, there's ways in which Disney really contributes to the perfection of the technology and also the humanization of it.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, and there's probably no way to know this, but like where did he start and where did he end up after these visits and thinking about like he had this idea of what he wanted the park to be and what did it evolve into after he saw what was out there that could be transformed into something that was a storytelling piece.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this also comes down to the fact that the studio was very good at making effects and creating
Mhm.
sets, but a lot of these things are things that are supposed to operate like a few times and that's it,
Right.
or they're in a very controlled environment. And so what I think a lot of this technology also allowed in a very practical way was just making sure that like, these rides could operate almost 24/7 essentially. And be able to have that amount of stress and repeatability. And I think that that's in essence one of the growing pains of the first few years and just the designing of the park is making sure that those who were trained in doing very temporary gags could actually translate that into these attractions, and that's where these various industrial controls really help them achieve that dream. And so that's a really interesting part of that story where the that Hollywood studio system was so deeply invested in experimenting with technology, and this sort of like opened up a whole new world for them to be able to make a lot of this sort of scale it up to what the theme park demanded in a really interesting way.
I want to know a little bit more about kind of like the rides as assembly lines. And you
Yeah.
describe attractions as carefully camouflaged assembly lines, which I've never thought of before or heard that
Hmm.
phrase. I think it's a bold one. So, what does that
Yeah.
actually mean in practice?
Yeah. Well, it's actually really funny. I have now, even after writing that phrase, I have found multiple sources from the 50s of people in the amusement industry who have
Oh
also
wow.
talked about the fact that that theming was a form of creative camouflage, which I really love.
Okay.
Um, and it's fascinating for many reasons. But yeah, I really, I think that that's one of the things that I was struggling always in writing was how to communicate sort of like the gist of what the big picture is. How do you boil it down? And what I like to say, it's like I'm basically saying that the theme park is the only place in our world where you can actually see the full scale of automation. Like outside the factory, you can see automated elements of our lives, but only in the theme park do you have these like large architectural systems that
Right.
are really like what an assembly line does. And so for me, every attraction is a great way of contemplating that. And I liken it to sort of like, you get on Peter Pan and it's like the POV video of
Mm.
what a product gets to see while they're at the assembly line. They're being moved from spot to spot. Machines are doing things to you. You know, in Peter Pan, it's not necessarily like being spray painted or anything like that, but
Yeah.
still, like, effects are being done when you hit certain sensors. And so you really get the sort of POV of the product. And the story that I really love about this is the idea that when Disneyland opened, there was no Peter Pan. The idea was that you were Peter Pan. So this idea of being manufactured to sort of at the other end of the assembly line, you are sort of Peter Pan, sort of is wonderfully literalized by that. And of course, caused a lot of issues, especially with Snow White, because kids were being stalked by the evil witch and crying, and it was too scary. And the parents were like, "Where the hell is Snow White?"
Yep.
Literally. um, and so, Mr. Toad, it worked because you were behind a steering wheel, so that sort of was easy to understand. So I really like that in some ways, even the conceptual planning of these rides really reflected sort of that element
Mhm.
of what they offered. So that's one way that I feel like it also helps to sort of contextualize like what I'm trying to say with this.
Mhm.
It's a way of really also acknowledging the long history. Like my one of my favorite examples, of course, is like you go on Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, like those are the assembly arms that are making our cars,
Mhm.
and
Right.
you get to be at the tip of it, and that's reworking how we tell stories and how we think of dark rides, and so it's a really great way of also seeing the way that amusement parks from the start, and especially theme parks, have always sort of copied and pasted these automation technologies into their space to really try to offer new experiences. I mean,
Mhm.
I think definitely you go on Harry Potter and you're like, that was a new physical experience that I just had.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really exciting and sort of understanding the broader phenomenon and how it allows us a glimpse into these different worlds.
Mhm.
I'm
Sorry.
think I'm thinking about what you said about you're a product moving along the line, and
Mhm.
Peter Pan is what you're supposed to be in this themed camouflaging. Do you get pushback from people who think you're sucking the magic out of this? Like if you look at this from a very high level
Mm.
angle, it could appear that you're trying to pull this magic that people hold on to so dearly from Disney. And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a really this is a really interesting question, even thinking about it as a historian, because one of my friends asked me this question very early on in this project, and she was like, "Are you killing the magic?" And I was like, "Well, we have to think about like what Walt was doing to promote the park. He was literally showing people the nuts and bolts of
That's true.
how
Mhm.
his engineers were working to make things, how basically what we come to understand as Imagineering was doing in order to build the park." And so I think that that's one of the critical things where it reflects a lot of what we think of magic being. I think we think of magic as something that we don't know how it happens, but I think one of the things that Walt really understood was this idea that part of what is seductive is knowing that this is not real, that it is artificial, and yet it is so convincing, or it's so
Mhm.
realistic, or it's so enchanting. And I think it also comes from a certain level of respect also for craftsmanship, of the skill and art that this all takes. An anthropologist that sort of contemplated some of these issues, and talked about sort of the enchantment of technology, reflected on the fact that he had this moment when he was a child, being at a Gothic church in England, and he was totally unimpressed by the Gothic church. But then there was a model made out of toothpicks of the church, and because he knew what a toothpick was and like how hard it would be to make that model, he was completely like enchanted by the model, not necessarily by the building that felt so abstract. Like, what does it mean to cut a stone and make this building? And I think that's a lot of what Walt was really harnessing. it's wild to think of, especially with all of our thoughts of how Disney operates as a modern company, to think that, you know, in 1963, in August of 63, he's publishing in National Geographic's, like, literally, like, Abraham Lincoln's, like, internal face with
Hmm.
everything stripped of like, you haven't even shown this animatronic, and yet
Right.
you're showing us what it is and also its internals? Like, that's amazing, and I think it speaks so much to that desire to really enchant us with, like, the bravado and, like, the heroic nature of, like, what it takes to make these, types of technologies, and so that's where I say, like, I feel like it heightens the magic in many ways because I think it sort of restores a lot of technical know-how that we don't really know as people, usually about how these machines work. And so I really hope that it will sort of tell a sort of second story or a B plot as you're going through rides and experiences in the park.
I think it helps also for us as the guest, maybe have a little bit more respect or understanding of why certain things are the way they are, or maybe why certain
Mhm.
rides are in placements they are, or why certain attractions they have this one here or that one there, or the space between it. And we talk all the time on our show, like, we gotta build the story first and build it around that, but, like, now hearing this perspective, talking about it, I'm thinking, like, well, there's so much more to it. You have to understand the guest behavior first, and where does this make sense, and how are they going through, and it's so much more detailed than a story, so it's almost like it's really enhancing the magic rather than possibly removing it in a
Yeah, and I
way.
think I think it totally speaks also to, like, the sort of practices of how we think about, like, creative processes. I think we often think of, like, blue sky design as, like, "Here's a great idea for what we could do.
Mm,
How do we do it?" But I think a lot of the story also shows that there's a really powerful thing in saying, like, "Hey, there's this weird technology. How could we use it creatively?" Because it can afford really interesting experiences. And so I think that that's also something that's exciting, that it also helps us to think differently about what sort of possibilities technology offer us in storytelling, and then asking the question like, okay, like, we have this weird robotic arm. Like, what story does it make sense to
Hmm.
incorporate this
mhm.
into? And so I think that's also like a big key part of how this process also unfolds over the years.
Do you get excited when they announce new, like, technological advancements? Like, when they had the floors, I forget what I'm blanking on the name of the floor tiles that move around, and, like, do you picture when they make those announcements, like, "Ooh, what are they gonna do with this? Where are they gonna put this?"
Yeah, I mean, and I also love reading all the sort of like, they just patented some weird thing that we have no
Hmm.
idea what they're going to do
Yeah,
with.
yes.
Um, and it's a really interesting story of also them like patenting really random things that may or may not. Like, it's actually funny. I've gone through a lot of Disney patents, and there's so many patents for like flickering light effects, like flickering flames, and I'm like, oh, this is a lot of flickering lights. Um, like, why? And it's just sort of this idea of like, well, we might be able to use it for something. And so it's that part is also exciting to like
Mhm,
imagine like what possibilities certain types of technologies offer. I think there's also like this idea I think we often try to downplay this a little bit in the Disney space, but like there's also the competitiveness of the different theme parks, and
right.
also just seeing like what I think Disney tends to be sort of like Apple. It's like, we could make a phone that folds, but is it up to the standards we want? Yes or no?
Right.
And so I think sometimes they adopt things pretty later on in terms of technology. Um, but I think that it also shows this whole idea of like, okay, well, if you are going to incorporate a robotic arm, what are you going to do with it now? Especially given that Universal has already done it. So that type of like dialogue between the sort of amusement park industry, I find also really fascinating because it also sort of always ups the ante a little bit. If like someone else has done it, well, then how is Disney going to creatively use this? Which is pretty exciting as well.
Mhm.
I I love a conversation like this because it sends me into 100 different, like, thoughts and questions of, like, where do I wanna ask next? And I think listening to what you're saying, you're talking about the competition, but I'm also thinking of, like, the internal competition that they could have and where they're thinking, "We have a ride system that worked in another park or another country, and how can we bring that very specific system here and put the
Mhm.
story around it that works for this. And however we may have come up with it in the past, like if you think of the Battle for Sunken Treasure in Shanghai, and there's rumors that that's going to be used for Avatar at
Mhm.
Disney California Adventure and things like that. So it's very much a system placed into another place and a new story built around that.
Yeah, no, that was exactly what I was thinking about when you started asking the
Yeah.
question. I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
yeah."
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I mean, it's one of the things I also love about that is that from a fan perspective, it also creates this sort of there's a tourism, like, global tourism desire that is sometimes so often motivated by ride systems as well.
Mhm.
It's not so much that you wanna see specifically Mystic Manor, but maybe you're into seeing, like, a trackless ride system. I'm
Mhm.
speaking as a Californian that didn't have trackless rides
Yeah.
until very recently. Um, and so, there's even that element of it. Um, and, there's a reason why you shouldn't got Pirates of the Caribbean and just install the latest ride system. There's also like a way in which it offers variety in different parks. So it's like you're not going to repeat the ride, but you're going to repurpose it and sort of then it's not the Navi River journey and
Mm.
it's not Pirates of the Caribbean. It's something of its own. And it's not Shanghai. So I think those are the exciting parts also internally, which is great because then there's like a fandom that's excited about the movements of technology across the parks, which is a really sort of interesting layer that only happens when you have as committed a fandom as Disney fans.
That's true.
True.
That's true. We love it.
Yeah. I mean, we're even having this
I
conversation. Like
Right.
this is not
Yeah.
necessarily like not every fandom is going to be like, yes, let's talk about technology.
Mhm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
we could do this for days,
Right.
honestly.
And I think about something like Villains Land, and maybe
Hmm.
they want a coaster there, and
Hmm.
and that is the starting point. Like we want a thrilling coaster. We're going to put in like we have to think of something very technical, and then we're going to build from there. We'll talk about this technical angle and different systems like block systems on a roller coaster. And you mentioned this in the book, and maybe the Omnimover, like a continuously loading attraction.
Hmm.
Do you think these are storytelling tools, or do you think this is throughput specifically just to get people through?
I think that sometimes you might rely on a technology that is very efficient. The Omnimover is a great example.
Hmm.
But I think that oftentimes a lot of these technologies, at least historically, um, have there's such a perfect like mix of like there are new affordances that this technology has and its own limitations. And we're going to do this really well. And so I think that we obviously don't have Adventures Through Inner Space, but we do have the Haunted Mansion. I think that's a great way of what I love about the Omnimover is that it's such a in some ways it's like the first ride that you would have imagined Disney to have done because it's so cinematic. Like you really are like a movie camera. Like you
Hmm.
are seeing the view that the director wants you to see the entire
Right.
time. You have a narrator giving you the story step by step. You know, by comparison, Mr. Toad feels very unruly. Like, what? You
Hmm.
can look in any direction?
Mhm.
And so I think that that's, like, one of those examples where, like, it's so well done and used. Would I say the same thing about Little Mermaid at DCA? Maybe not, even though I do
Right.
enjoy
Hmm.
it, because it's a sort of new Omnimover, but I think there are moments where there's, like, really sort of perfect applications of the technology that really works. Almost like it's also, like, experimental, like, you're playing to see what you can do, and I think, like, Haunted Mansion is a great example of that. There was another one you mentioned that I was thinking about, the Omnimover and
The block systems for coasters.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of these things, what I like about this also is that it sort of creates a lot of the internals of how rides work create sort of like the script for what the
Hmm.
ride needs to do, and I think that there's a lot of interesting ways in which that, comes into play. Like what I tell my students always is like with block zones, which I guess I can, for listeners, viewers, I guess I can explain very briefly. Basically, the block zone, the easiest way of saying it is that you segment the track into different zones, and there should always be a block behind any vehicle where there are no vehicles, and if a vehicle were to enter, they would be stopped. So in a roller coaster, the way that works is that you have brakes, and there are various brake runs or block zones of brakes. And every time you pass one, the brakes go up behind you, and it's not until you hit the next one that those brakes are going to go down. So that if a car were going to crash into you, it would be stopped by the brakes behind. It is a very slapdash summary of block zones, which
Oh, that
I
was
hear
great.
can be very challenging to teach cast members how block zones work, and it often involves little models of trains.
Huh.
Um, but yeah, and so I think that's great because I always tell my students, okay, if you're like in a modern roller coaster like Space Mountain, every time the track goes completely horizontal, chances are you're crossing a zone
Mm.
because,
Mhm.
you don't want an evacuation if it needs to happen on a slanted part of track like it would at the Matterhorn, which they learned from. Um, and then you usually want to drop so that cast members can just push the car off when they restart and you don't have to like have issues getting the car out, like at the Matterhorn, where a lot of which was the experimentation. Like that
Sure.
is where they
Mhm.
first did block zones that are for a roller coaster. So, these things were sort of being perfected. And so there's ways in which like even your experience, even if it's not like a critical part of the narrative, like part of the experience is being determined by that technology and those systems. And so I find that really sort of exciting. And like one of the points that I make in the book is that like breakdowns are just like the system working perfectly. And oftentimes, we think of breakdowns as like a wheel fell off a car. That's never the case, usually. That's hopefully not the case. Um, and so there's a way in which these things are the moments that you get to like experience as part of the whole experience. You get to really understand like how these systems work and how their logic sort of operate in ways that you don't really ever get to see. And I feel like for most Disney fans, getting stuck on Space Mountain is an exciting thing. Like the lights come
True.
up and it's like
Yeah.
world changes. Although I will say one time it happened to me, and it was like the fourth time that it happened to me. And I needed to get out of the park by a certain time. And I was like, okay, I did not
Okay,
No.
this
mean
isn't fun anymore. Yeah.
this. I could skip this one. Like we can get
Don't need
but yeah.
4 times on that. Yeah. I
You
think
know,
for all Disney fans, the evac is like the dream because you're like, I'm getting to
yeah,
see what's all behind
yeah.
here. This is crazy.
Yeah, I
And
remember one of the weirdest moments for me at Disneyland was it was really late, like on a really slow night. It was like maybe half an hour before closing, and I got stuck in Pinocchio, lights
Oh.
on,
oh
only
no,
person on the ride,
Oh
that's
no.
and it was
terrifying.
I don't
it
want
was
that
it was
though.
terrifying.
All right, never mind. I
I'm
changed it.
scared.
I was like, "Oh, great," and it was the carnival scene. I was like,
No,
"I."
Oh
the worst
no.
part. No.
I was like, I feel like if I started screaming and ran out of the car, they would sort of forgive me for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understandable.
Yeah, it would
Really.
be very understandable. But yeah.
Well, you were talking about the block zones and how they kind of set up and pace the story for
Mhm,
you. And I think about like, could maybe those be seen as different acts or scenes of an attraction? Like I think of Expedition Everest, for example, and like the way that is
mhm.
so blocked out into different
Yes.
scenes that you're going through, and it kind of creates like a foundation for
Mm.
you to place your story. I think in a way.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really great example. I just rode, Expedition Everest for the first time
No
ever,
way.
Really?
like a few months
Wow.
ago, yeah.
Oh
I
wow.
was a very terrified child.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
Like,
that's okay. That's okay.
I thought that Space Mountain was the most terrifying thing in the world.
Oh.
Um,
It's
yeah,
scary. It's in
so
the dark.
I just wrote it, and that's, like, such a great example, like,
Yeah.
when because it's a moment also where you see how much of, like, the handoffs that
Mhm.
happen in roller coasters, especially when, like, there's any change of track and stuff like that. Like, that's often used as a way of, like, building up, like, anxiety and
Mhm.
momentum. I thought the same thing in writing, Hagrid's
Yeah.
motorbike.
Yes.
Yes,
Um,
that's
Yeah.
another one I was
That's
thinking
real
about.
it's
Yeah.
like where it's like you
Mhm.
and there's I feel like those moments are like the best because you can feel the computer thinking. Like it's
Yeah.
this
Yes.
moment of
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
the track has stopped, but
Mhm.
there's still no motion because everything is like clicking off, being like,
Yep.
yes, yes, yes. Okay, now you can go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I love those experiences because they really capture, I think, especially for fans who like do these rides all the time and they're like so familiar. Like, I feel when you read the book, I think that's what's going to be really exciting because it's moments like that where it's like the technology becomes such a narrative
Hmm.
player, like, and it's often moments of like anxiety that's
Mhm.
really played up.
Yep.
But I think it's also just what you see, and I love this idea of like it being the different acts of a story, because in many ways it is. Sometimes, I think one of the things that I actually wish, um, design teams in every theme park thought more about is like how do you sort of incorporate some of these things, even breakdowns, as part of storytelling?
Mhm.
Because I think they're in the world that we live in, there's such a fandom that is interested in these ideas of like creating even these sort of peripheral experiences as part of a unique experience in the park, that I do think there's like opportunity for that. I think I
Yeah.
was once talking to Tom Morris about this, and that he was telling me that he's like, yeah, I was always proposing that they should like for Pirates of the Caribbean do something like in the boat storage area, which
Mhm.
they originally thought they were gonna have to use, but then they weren't really using. And so it was like maybe like every so often a like boat goes off into boat storage and you have another experience there. And I'm like, yes, that's
That would
exactly
be
what
so
Mhm.
cool.
that's what I want. Like the idea of like building in the sort of
Yeah.
chance and unique opportunities um into the ride systems is something that I think is really offered by like just the logic of how they work. And
Yeah.
it could actually solve a lot of like even like, very practical problems, like if you're gonna have a ride cascade on Space Mountain, maybe send a rocket on a special weird experience, that might not require that much track, but right now, I'm Imagineering a little bit too much, so I will
No,
stop speculating.
That's
I
that's what we
I
love
love
to
that.
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that would be so neat to have as part of the ride, and then you never know what you're gonna get. But I also feel like part of
Yeah,
that is that suspense is like, I know the technology isn't gonna fail, but in my mind, I'm like, is this gonna turn on the way?
right.
Is this gonna
Mhm.
go?
Yeah,
Is the track really gonna move where it needs to go? So that's all
yeah.
part of
Yeah.
it and everything. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's I mean, maybe this is just the academic in me, but I think that that's, like, where, like, the real, like, poetics and, like, the beauty of it come in because a lot of that, like, delay is precisely the hyper safety of it all.
Right.
Like, if it were if it were a different situation, that track would probably slam down and you'd be off.
Yep.
But it's,
Mhm.
like, the slowness of it that actually captures, like, a lot of, like, the double checking that's happening for you,
Mhm.
and I really do love that aspect of it all.
Like when the roller
Um,
coasters, when they're riding when the ones that go really up, like the
yeah.
Velocicoaster, and it has to redo it, the
Oh,
jump up
yeah.
again and everything, and you're, like, watching it, that it knows it didn't gain that momentum. It
Yeah.
can't go. It's gotta redo this.
I was also recently at Islands of Adventure for the first time since I was, like, a teenager,
Oh, wow.
and I was like, "I'm gonna ride everything," and I got in front of Velocicoaster and I was like, "Nope, nope, not no." I'm always in parks on, like, roller coaster
Yeah.
database reading things, and I
Mhm.
saw, like, the
Mhm.
max speed, and I was like, no, no, I'm not."
Oh, no. We'll get you on that the next
Mhm.
time. Next time you're back, we'll get you on it.
Next time.
Wow, we're the same kind of people. Roller Coaster Database was my like home landing page when I was in high school. Like that was I'd come home and see what was the random coaster they put up or some newly added coaster. So you are
No, I
speaking my
absolutely love
language
that.
here.
I also, like, get into that this is definitely the art historian in me where I'll be, like, at a theme park, and I'm like, "That track looks like it's Arrow, like,
Yeah.
from the
Oh,
'70s." Like, I'm, like,
they
dating
get
tracks, and
so
I'm
sick
always
of me.
like
I'm like, is that a Vacoma? They're like,
literally, literally.
how do you? Why would you know this?
Yeah, exactly, and then I'm, like,
Yep.
always checking. I'm like, "Well, I can find the
Hmm.
answer."
Yep. I'll always find the answer. They're like, we don't
Wow.
really care, but but I'm gonna find it.
I do think, Steven, you met your match
I
today.
think
Wow.
so. I think so. We're in good company.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like I mean, it's like one of those things and I mean, it was, like, so productive for so long to think that way because it really is part of, like so much of this is, like, building legibility of these systems that, like,
Hmm.
there's no way we would know about this. It's so rarefied in many ways, and it was really great to, like, have, like, that legibility and, like, be able I don't know, I don't wanna say that I'm, like, a roller coaster connoisseur because I also, like, don't ride the hardcore roller coasters, but I will stare at the track, I will say that
Yeah.
much.
Hmm.
Can still
I'm like at Knott's
appreciate them.
Berry Farms, like, not riding anything, just staring at
Yeah.
tracks.
Well, you put that knot in Knott's Berry Farm, so
Literally.
there you go. Well, I want to test this entire theory. Let's take Haunted Mansion for example and strip away all the ghosts and all the music and
Mhm.
what are we left with here? Can you walk us through what this attraction is purely as an automated system?
Yeah, I mean, Haunted Mansion is a really I mean, Haunted Mansion's an interesting one and a sort of, like, a boring one in some ways, and I'll
Is there a
explain why, and
better
I'll
give
explain
me
it
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I'll explain exactly why, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
So many of the dark rides, like, you're going around, there are a bunch of zones. In that case, zones are basically energized track versus not, supplies power to a motor, and if, you hit a dead piece of track, you're gonna stop.
Mhm.
Simple as that. Um, and all these zones are really about the fear that two cars will crash into each other. With the Omnimover, where it is just a chain of cars, you have eliminated the need for any blocking or zones.
Mhm.
With that also comes the idea that you have narration being fed to you directly to the viewers. And so you therefore have this world, and that's what becomes really interesting, where unlike a dark ride where you hit a certain sensor or the ride detects that you're in a certain place and then it does something like I always love the evil witch coming out in Snow White,
Mm.
which always scares the hell out of me.
Mhm.
Even though I know it's there. Like these effects are being triggered according to your location. What I love about the Haunted Mansion is that the ghosts don't care. You're just there
Yep.
and they're going about their lives.
That's true.
And that's sort of great because it becomes much more like almost voyeuristic. Like rather than you being in the narrative, there is this sense of like, oh, you're just riding through this world. And it adds an eeriness to it all because
Mhm.
these ghosts don't care about you. They're going about their business and you're
Yeah.
getting to peek into it. And so that's so great because what I would say is like the boring example is also really, from a narrative point of view, it actually does have a very powerful effect. Whereas if like the ghosts were responding to you and like popping out at you, that would be such a different sort of experience as to what the Haunted Mansion is. That would start
Mhm.
to border on like, I don't know, Universal Horror Nights, I suppose.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, and
Mhm.
that's, I think, one of the things that I really love about it. One of my nerdiest things, which is somehow relevant to this, is, like, that soundtrack that has, like, all the Disneyland, like, theme songs to all the
Oh,
attractions?
yeah.
I love listening to the Indiana Jones one and narrating effects.
I mean,
So I'll be
you
like, "Air puff, air puff, air puff, um,
Wow.
move to the left." And, like, I'm just like I
I
can
don't
basically narrate the track from the soundtrack.
That's amazing. I don't think you have anything to worry about. I think you're in really good company with this group because
I
this
know,
is
Yeah.
that's
stuff
I
that
feel
we all
safe.
do.
Well,
So
we're Orlando Disney World purists, and we still
I
listen to like
understand.
Illuminations, and I can
yeah,
hear the fireworks being
yeah,
launched during the soundtrack. Like I know it's not there, but I can feel it.
yeah.
Yeah, as a millennial, like, I grew up like, Epcot is my place, like,
Mhm.
I love
Our
Epcot,
home.
I love the, like, '90s optimism of it all
Oh
that
yeah.
it captured, like, when I was in Walt Disney World, I have to say, I went to Magic Kingdom once, and then I was like,
Mm.
"I'm just gonna spend the rest of my time in Epcot Center because this
Oh,
Yeah.
is
welcome
really
to
my
Yeah.
happy
me
Yeah.
place."
every time I'm
That's
at the
yeah.
park. I just
And
Mhm.
I'm always at
and the whole
Epcot.
time I was just like, "We're about to go on the greatest ride ever, Spaceship Earth."
Yep. And trying to take
I'm
newbies
like
on that today, they're like, "Oh, okay."
yeah, it's like, "Oh, this is what you like, huh?"
Mhm.
I'm
Do you
like, "It's
feel
not
that
Horizons, but it's the closest thing."
Oh,
True.
yeah,
It's
that's
what
all we
we've got.
have. Give us what we
Mhm.
have, yes. Do you
Yeah.
think that in that one that we're kind of the same way, where we're just observers in the life in Spaceship Earth that's going on?
Yeah, totally,
Mhm.
totally. Yeah, that's another really good example. And I mean, yeah, it's funny thinking about, like, the pictures and things like that, ways in which they try to make it more interactive in
Sure.
that
Yeah.
sense. Um, yeah, that is another it is really interesting also to, like, separate these moments where you really are sort of peering into a world that's going on around you versus the ones where you are part of the story or
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
like your presence is understood. I always used to joke that like in the Spider-Man ride at Islands of Adventure, every scene in that ride is like, "You're not supposed to be here. Get out of here."
Mhm.
Yep.
Which is sort of like the easy narrative
Uh-huh.
solution to it's like constantly like you're not supposed to be here, which I think is definitely Universal's thing because that's sort of like
Yeah.
the whole point of like
Yeah.
Jurassic Park also.
Like, "Get out of
Transformers,
here!
it's all yeah.
Wrong turn."
Yep.
which at some point, like, I sort of, like, do associate that with, like, the theme park experience,
Mhm.
with this idea that you're not supposed to be there and we have to get you out, and that is very different to the, "Well, we're not even gonna be aware that you're here," like the
Mhm.
Right.
ghosts.
Well, and
Um,
and I think about
yeah.
I think Imagineering has really leaned into the incorporating you into the story aspect, and I think about something I don't know, this is a great example, but with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, the
Mhm.
whole time they're reiterating, "You're here, you're helping us find this band." I don't know if that's the storyline I would have chosen for this, but, it's interesting that now we're not getting as many, like, storybook, like, ride through and observe attractions, and we're now we're always a recruit, and we're always
Yes.
somebody who's being used in some way. But
Mhm.
Mhm.
it's interesting that we've gotten away from that. I didn't think about it so black and white until now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally love the comparison between Pirates of the Caribbean and, like, Rise of the Resistance because I feel like I mean, I think those are 2 both masterpieces in their own right of, like, this immersive storytelling,
Hmm.
these fleshed out worlds. It's sort of long and theatrical, but again, it's such a different world of, like, you are cruising on a boat while all these things are happening, and there are sort of nods to, like, there is a little bit of, like, maybe you're not supposed to be here, but it's okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Especially when you're coming into the story. But, Rise of the Resistance is the complete opposite. Like, at every step of the way, it is about you.
Hmm.
I guess you're not supposed to be there, but you're here, and
Yeah, but
this
there's
is
like an
what's gonna
intention
happen.
Yeah.
behind it. You've come
Mhm.
somewhere you're not supposed to be, and now they've put you as a prisoner. That is
Yeah,
like you're there's a purpose.
yeah, but both are so deeply cinematic in that
Hmm.
sense, that I do love the 2 as, like, these perfect, like, sort of hallmarks of what Disney does so well.
Mhm.
And what, like, I think is sort of for me, like, the sort of high point of what theme parks can do so well and in such an exciting way.
Rise is definitely an interesting one because I feel like that also is a good mix of like human engagement from like the cast
Mhm,
members and a mix of animatronics and all of that. And I want to ask you about this a bit further because you talk about eliminating the human
mhm,
element in some
yeah.
phrases. And do you feel that animatronics are about replacing people or do you think it's preserving performance or kind of enhancing the overall experience?
Yeah. I mean, I love animatronics. I think again, it's that moment of, like, you could have an actor, but because it's not real, and it
Hmm.
feels real. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
it's about that drama. And I think it is ultimately that sweet spot. I think that if you were I think if I think that sometimes when you overuse animatronics, you sort of, like, almost starts getting a little boring also.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also very interesting because, I always say that I think the most convincing animatronic ever done is literally the Navi who's, like,
Yes.
just twitching.
Hmm.
I'm like, all these animatronics move way too much. Like,
Hmm.
Hondo
Yep.
Onaka needs to stop
Yep.
moving. Like, calm
Yeah.
Yep.
down.
Uh-huh.
Like
It's
you don't need
overacting
to
at
move
this
that
point,
much.
right?
Like,
Yeah.
maybe just lean and, like,
Mhm.
raise your hand casually every so often.
Very expressive.
Um, Very expressive. It's like, "Look at us, we can move. We can move
Ah.
in all these different ways."
Mhm.
Um, and the whole idea of eliminating the human element is really interesting. It sort of exists throughout the 20th century, but it really comes up with people in the amusement industry who were really obsessed with people dying, like, while operating rides,
Oh,
which I think
Mm.
also says something about the era. So a
yep.
lot of it was about, like, what happens if someone has a heart attack? Um, on the other side, it was also about, like, what happens if someone's being lazy and not doing their
Mhm.
job? And so the elimination of the human element was, like, this goal of, like, making safety systems especially that were, um, sort of foolproof, but, like, also just, like, proof also from literally people dying on the job, and so that was
Okay.
the sort of elimination element.
Sure.
That becomes a lot more pressing, and one of the things that I do sort of chronicle a little bit is that Imagineers were uncomfortable when they started doing human animatronics because they were like, "Uh,
Yeah, it's that
we're
uncanny
Right.
crossing the
valley.
line here, and,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
where are we
Mhm.
going?" And so it's such an interesting moment. I love thinking now about, like, I don't know if you've heard about Tilly Norwood, like the AI actor
Mhm.
who
Yes.
just dropped that
Mhm.
music video and all
Yep.
this. and it's such an interesting history because it is sort of very similar conversations. And I know like her studio has made this whole thing about like we are a team of artists and scientists who are working on this. We're so there are humans behind this. There's a
Mhm.
huge team, and it's such a sort of similar parallel to these conversations about like what's the role of actors and unions and all this. And um, I think that there isn't a sort of perfect sort of answer. I think that animatronics are part and parcel of it. And I think one of the ways in which Rise of the Resistance works so well is because you have that combination of the animatronics doing very specific things and the humans doing very specific things. And I think in some ways now I'm more impressed by the role playing of cast members sometimes.
Right.
Um, like I remember as a child, I was not necessarily terrified of the Haunted Mansion. I was terrified of the cast members
Yes.
in those
Mhm.
years who
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
in character. And it
Yes.
was like, you will show me no pity for being scared. And
Nope.
so,
Sure.
I mean, there's an element of that that I think is really interesting because I think we're so used to, you know, the face characters and all these things being in character as well as the animatronics that I think now having cast members so in characters also
Yeah.
become a sort of new frontier of how we're sort of enchanted by what the theme park does.
Yeah, and I think a really beautiful blend of both is the Great Movie Ride, where
Mhm.
you
Oh,
had
yes.
you had living people and animatronics in the same scene, like fighting with each
Mhm,
other, and we still believed it in a
Right.
way, like we weren't questioning like what is this? We wanted to be in that moment with them, and I don't think we get a lot like that anymore. You think about something like Jaws,
mm,
where you're interacting with this animatronic shark in the water, this figure that's just has no response to us, but you've got a live person there that's giving you their emotion and their
mhm,
portrayal of what this is supposed to be. So I think what we have now is something like Rise, where we're
mhm.
it's a little bit smaller and more less acting, more persona.
Yeah.
But I hope we don't lose that entirely.
Yeah, like, I would definitely say, like, if I were at a board meeting and someone said, "Let's replace the skippers with animatronics," I'd be like,
Right.
well, no,
Mm-hmm.
you lost the point there. We completely lost the
Mm-hmm.
plot."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that that is something interesting. One of the things that we also whether we're talking about, like, AI or, like, animatronics is also something that's easy to forget. These things are expensive. They are
Sure.
not
Mhm.
cheap, and so sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot more economic from a very like cynical point of view to actually have actors
Mm-hmm.
than sort of investing on these hugely expensive technologies that need to operate constantly and so on. But yeah, I love the example of the Great Movie Ride because it's such a great moment also in creating a division between like the filmic people and those who are actually like
Mm-hmm.
interjecting into your space.
Right.
And so that's such a like was yeah, that's such a brilliant and perfect way of combining those worlds and, like, articulating them, and I think that when theme parks do that, that's when they really excel at what they're doing.
And since we're on this topic, I want to bring up there's a lot of conversation around this new Olaf draws that they're bringing back to the Magic Band of animation that's opening in a few weeks, and this the conversation is about they're putting Olaf in as this kind of character who's going to facilitate this project with a taped artist. And
Mhm.
so they've pulled out this human element, and I think to me it sounds like it's very clearly about the throughput of this attraction and the reliability of it, knowing that they can just push play and it goes. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I actually wasn't aware of that. I thought you were actually gonna
Oh,
ask me about the Olaf animatronic, and
oh,
so
well
I was like,
that too.
I didn't know which one we were going.
This is pretty
Um,
recent news, so
okay, yeah, I
yeah.
sort of somehow
Mm,
missed that one, but that's one of those moments where I'm like, "Well, maybe that's not the right." I think
mhm.
that is one
Mhm.
of those moments where it's like, "Well, isn't it all about seeing someone actually draw and, like, the
Right.
Right.
enchantment
Yeah,
of that?"
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that there are definitely moments where and I think that's one of the things also where, like, I think theme parks explore these options and then they learn from
sure.
because these things very rapidly become you might go in there to get a break from the heat, but you might not necessarily be actually wanting to be there. And so I think theme parks also get a lot of instant feedback from those types of experiments.
I want to talk about the future of it, of where the parks
Yeah.
are going and where everything goes.
Hmm.
And I feel we touched, I think, a little bit, but I feel like there's a lot of anxiety. You mentioned it kind of with animatronics, and there was a feeling about this back in the day, but AI replacing labor. When you
Hmm.
look at mid-century automation and really what Disney was building, do you see those parallels? Do you feel like there's reason for people to f- feel that way back then and now?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, there's some sections in the book where I'm sort of broadening out from the park to like think about the broader history of the world. When I was writing these things, I was like, well, I don't want to alienate the people who are here exclusively for Disney. But it's sort of funny because, well, I told myself, well, it's history. It can be a little bit boring at times. But I also was like, honestly, we're in such a world where like reading about these debates in the
Yeah.
50s is sort of really interesting. And
Right.
like, it's the sometimes it's just shocking how the words are exactly what's coming out of our mouths
Right.
today. And that's, I think, it's a great lesson in many ways. It can be comforting to know that we have been here before in a different way. And I think the to really answer your question, I think I've really contemplated this a lot, and I think there are moments where the panics were overblown, and
Mm.
I think there are other aspects of the panics that I'm
Okay.
like, "Oh, you were totally right. Yes, you
Mhm.
are right." And we're sort of living in the trajectory of those implications. Um, and I think that the way that I would divide that is that the question of, like, what makes us uniquely human is definitely a question that was really critical, and asking, like, yes, where do people not necessarily have to perform these types of tasks, but there is space for them? Um, I think one of the very practical things that a lot of economists brought up in the past was just, if you have all these machines working, like, okay, so who's gonna be a consumer in our world? Like,
Mm.
who's gonna
Mhm.
get paid to consume? And so I think there's issues that come up with, like, pay and how people live that are very
Mhm.
pressing to automation questions and, of course, to where we are with AI. And I think that the part that I think is maybe a little bit overblown is that it does create different opportunities,
Mm.
and it sort of completely reshapes the landscape. So as one mid-century person said, like, we will hopefully be living in sort of a very good space if we can survive what comes in between that great space and where we are now. And I think that's really ultimately the challenge of a lot of these changes, like, to understand how we sort of get through the rough spots and the sort of experimentation that comes along with it.
Mm.
I think it'll be interesting, especially with the theme park. I mean, I'm someone who hates screens because I think
Mhm.
the
Mm.
and projections of any sort, because I think that what the theme park really has to sell is that in a world filled with screens, you're not
Right.
in front of a screen.
Right.
Right.
Sorry. So I think that what the theme park really offers us is to have these sort of like primary experiences. And so I really hope that, like, especially AI in the theme park doesn't devolve into like, here is a character talking to you from a screen. But there are ways where I could see like AI, like in some of these patterns of like judging emotional response and changing what the attraction
Mhm.
looks like, depending on how you're
Mhm.
reacting to it. Those are the opportunities that I think will be quite interesting. And there are also things that no human could ever possibly do. Like, I guess you could have a ton of people staring at people's faces, but that's not feasible or
Right.
desired either. So I think that that's really how I would see it, as like, preserving what theme parks offer us, which is ultimately like in-person, unmediated experiences, and understanding like, what we could get at home, which is ultimately like what the ecosystem needs, distinguishing that.
Do you think Walt would be excited with all of these advancements and where things are going in this kinda new turn?
Oh, totally. Like, yes. I mean, maybe a little bit too much when you think about how enthusiastic he was. And, I do talk about this a little bit where it's like this sort of issue of like, yeah, Walt would have probably loved AI actors, like, because everyone talks about like he would complain about actors and would be like, oh, if only we could just have these animatronics doing everything.
Mhm.
And it's just like he probably would have been like, yeah, replace all of my actors with AI. but at the same time, like he didn't actually do that. But it is interesting, as someone who also whose entire job was doing cartoons and producing
Right.
these other forms of like performance that also involved human labor sort of on the back end. Yeah, I think this would actually be a development. I think you could frame this in a very cynical way and very anti-Walt way of being like, yeah, he would have loved this because there's no humans. Or you can say like, no, he would have been actually very well suited to deal with this moment because he also understands that like no technology is sort of magical. Like it
Hmm.
requires an entire massive unseen teams of people to actually make it work. And so I think that's something where like we probably have a lot to learn from the studio system of like animation in that period of like the massive labor that these, you know,
Right.
Bambi wasn't an actor, but there was a whole team that drew Bambi that
Sure.
did all these things. So yeah, I think those are challenges that I think Walt would have been well suited to think
Hmm.
Yeah.
through. But yeah.
Well, I want to jump back to something we talked about earlier, and we kind of established that Roland, you and I are very much our heads are turned looking outside of the ride vehicle, and Katie's very much in that moment and experiencing it as they want you to. And do you think that Disneyland and the Disney parks teach us to ignore automation, to stop seeing these systems that are running our lives?
Yeah, I think that early on, I mean, I think it's a back and forth. Yeah, early on, I think a lot of what like the theme park did, I like to say it's sort of like it taught us to stop worrying and love automation. Because it did, I think, make a lot of these technologies demystify them.
Hmm.
But it didn't demystify them by saying like, "Look, we are applying automation and you shouldn't be scared
Right.
of it." It did it just by making them sort of a common part of our lives in these sort of spaces of recreation. Um, and so I think that that's one of the ways in which it definitely acclimated people. I think it also reworked how we then approached automation in, factories and so on. Like I'm obsessed with the fact that like every time that Amazon or Apple or anyone talks about a robot that they always have to name them. And they
Hmm.
always have very Disney names. Like
Yeah.
Apple's like, meet Daisy, our recycling robot. And it's like, my favorite is Chipotle's Chippy that is supposed to make
Oh,
Chipotle chips.
I didn't know about
And the
Cute.
Chippy.
whole thing, yeah, it's great. And the whole thing about Chippy is that no, Chippy is not going to improve Chipotle chips because it's all about the sensation of having a chip that is saltier than the other ones. So Chippy is trained to keep the human element in
Okay.
the
Wow.
chips. And so like there are these moments where you just see like that question of like humanity and like the technology just like constantly colliding. And so I really love that. And I feel like that's part of that story about like associating these types of technologies with a place like Disneyland then meant that you were then seeing factories as a sort of Disneyland. And so
Hmm.
I actually end the book with, talking about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where suddenly you
Yep.
walk into the factory and what you find is a theme park, no longer machines. And I think that sort of captures like how just even by the 70s, that whole world had been radically changed. Where
Mm.
like the theme
Right.
park and even now is affecting how we imagine what a factory could potentially look like in this sort of fantasy space.
Hmm.
So it is a really interesting back and forth of directions of like influence and how that changes things.
I was trying to think also like other areas of Disney today that could be part of automation, and this is probably like a little bit spicy because people feel a certain way about it. But Lightning Lane, do you think that
Mhm.
Lightning Lane is a form of automation that's really shaping the behavior inside the park and how they can kind of control things for the park?
Oh yeah, totally. Like, I think that's a really interesting part of all this. Like, as part of this, like, sort of desire to automate the world. It was not just about machines, like, you know, things like queuing theory, like how people line up,
Yeah.
Hmm.
was a huge issue in the 50s and coming out of the World War II. And so these were definitely conversations that were being had in this period and that were being handled by think tanks and really important people. And of course, um, in essence, that is what Lightning Lane is about. It's about creating a system that pulls people across the park and sort of sorts out how behaviors are working out and how, you visit attractions, where you are in the park and so on. And I think that's also another way in which the theme park shows us very powerful things about our world, because that's not that dissimilar to like how like Uber works and like
Mm.
how drivers are being pulled to like surge zones and things like that. So we are even seeing that technology like that in the sort of like the software side of things is also very much coming from this idea of moving people and circulating them around, just in the same way that like many of our apps are also doing, sort of having these nudges of behavior. Like, I've had some great conversations with like Uber drivers recently where they're just like, this is how our app works. And I'm like, oh, that sounds probably like the back end of like Lightning Lane. Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds.
Yeah.
It's like, so who's
Mhm.
your Genie Plus?
Right.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, and that's, I think I really do love all these things about the theme park, because like, yeah, you can like criticize it, you can embrace it. But I think that ultimately it's such a mirror to our world that it's the same sort of conversations we can have about the theme park are actually really important conversations that we should be having about our world in general. So that's
Mm,
actually a really like great part of this. Like for me, like it's a great space to just like see it sort of like in a miniature way, which I think is
right.
again, the beauty of theme spaces.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I really think that this book is very eye-opening in a way that I think a lot of our listeners will really respond well to. And I want to ask you, if someone reads your book and walks
Mhm.
into Disneyland or Magic Kingdom the next day, what are they going to see that they've never noticed before?
Everything. That's my goal. Like, it's like I want you to the minute that you step onto a ride, I want you to see a whole 'nother layer of storytelling happening. Probably not even before you step onto the ride, like, just like the station, like, when you're boarding, you will encounter a whole world of things there that, you will have read about and suddenly makes a lot more sense. And I think it's like it's that type of revelation, and I can say this just, like, from taking students to the park. Um, it just really changes how people see things and how they react to things. One of my favorite things made me very proud was a student of mine was like, "I was counting block zones while we were on the Matterhorn." I'm like, "That's adorable. I
Look at
love it.
that.
I love
Wow.
it." Didn't ask you to do that, but that's absolutely great, and
Uh-huh.
I'm so glad you're doing that. And so, like, I just having for me, it's just about having legibility of technology and, like, of these worlds and, like, having a newfound appreciation for what it is. And I think there's something I think one of the most wonderful and obnoxious things about Disney fandom is that everyone always wants to outsmart one another. Like, I love walking through the park and being like just listening to all the, "Well,
Oh,
actually,
we
this is
love
not."
Yes.
that. We love that.
And I
Mhm.
Yep.
just like I'm like, "You know what? Well, you can definitely use this book for that."
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Outsmart your friends, if
Yeah,
nothing else.
outsmart your friends if
Yeah.
nothing else. No, but I think that is one of the things. But yeah, no, I just want people to go in with like I would like to say new eyes, but it's really also like I think of like the book also really encourages like listening, feeling,
Uh-huh.
really being sort of present in your body, which I think is a great
Mhm.
thing to do.
Yeah.
Just, beyond the sort of calm app sort of aspects of that.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like it does feel less like a history book and more like I'm looking through things through a different lens. So
Mhm.
it doesn't take away from the magic, I feel like. It just adds it and it's making me like I told you at the start, I can't wait to go to the park now and walk in and see that and be like, "Oh, this is exactly what you mean for this one and this and this." So I'm excited to see that side of it.
I'm excited that you're excited. And I have to say, like, as someone who's also been doing this for many years now, I also will say that every time I go to the park, like, I'm excited to also have those experiences,
Mhm.
and to feel these things because now they're part of the cast of characters, and that's really sort of magical, for
Mhm.
lack of a better term.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway is the camouflage of automation, and I think it
Yes.
really sets up the difference in what a theme park is versus an
Yes.
amusement park. Whereas if you go to, a roller coaster focused park, you're seeing the
Yes.
engineering and the mechanics behind everything, whereas Disney wants to really take you out of that and pull that away, and I think this really details that in a really beautiful way.
And that was actually one of the things that I kept asking myself early on. I was like, well, if you're making the argument that it's all about experiencing automation, then why is like, like the traveling fair or the Knott's Berry Farms where like the roller coasters are right there. Why isn't that more to the point? And I really came to this idea that it's really about like the fact that it's pushed under the surface. So
Hmm.
it's no longer obvious. So therefore it adds to that layer of like discovery and excitement that I think just isn't the same as like, here's a machine that you're going to ride. It's a
Mhm.
very different experience.
Yeah. Well, Roland, truly thank you for this work. Thank you for taking the time to
Of
speak
course.
with
Thank
us
you.
today. I think there is a the depth of research here, and the clarity of your argument, and the way that that you've connected this industrial history through themed entertainment. I think it's really rare to see it analyzed this way and so rigorously, and it's something that I really appreciate as somebody who has a big interest in this. And but yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through it with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
The book is Disneyland and the Rise of Automation, and it releases April 28th. So if you care about Imagineering, pretty sure you do since you're listening to the show, and how it works, why it works, and where it might be going, this is definitely essential reading for you.
Well, we're taking next week off, but we'll be back on May 4th with an all-new original Imagineering project. And I'll be honest, conversations like this absolutely influence how we think about what we design. When you start seeing attractions as systems and machines, it kind of changes the kinds of questions that you ask.
So read the book, then come back May 4th.
Roland, thank you again. And to everyone listening, we will see you in a couple weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.